The year was 1923, and a stifling humidity clung to Havenwood, Tennessee, even in late autumn. It was the kind of damp heat that seeped into bones, breeding mildew in forgotten corners, and a quiet, simmering unease in the hearts of men. Detective Elias Thorne, a man whose cynicism was as ingrained as the lines around his tired eyes, stepped off the rattling train, the cinder dust settling on his worn fedora. The town, nestled deep within a valley, was a picture postcard of southern piety. White steepled churches, oak trees heavy with Spanish moss, and neat, if somewhat weathered, clapboard houses. Yet, beneath this veneer of serenity, Thorne felt an immediate subtle chill. He'd seen enough small towns to know that tranquility often served as a thin veil for simmering malice. He hadn't come for a vacation. Two young choir boys, Thomas and Samuel Miller, aged 10 and 12, had vanished without a trace from the revered Holy Trinity Baptist Church. The telegram from Sheriff Brody had been terse, almost pleading. Urgent. 2 boys missing, unprecedented, need your particular expertise, Havenwood. Thorne's particular expertise was less about solving crimes with dazzling deductions and more about an unsettling knack for sniffing out the rotten core of human depravity, a skill honed by a past he rarely spoke of, even to himself. A past that still, on quiet nights, dragged him back to the acrid smell of smoke and the raw scream of a child. His first stop was the sheriff's office, a cramped, dusty room that smelled of stale coffee and unfulfilled hopes. Sheriff Brody, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes that seemed perpetually clouded by worry, greeted him with a weary nod. Detective Thorne, thank God you're here. This ain't like Havenwood. No town is ever like that, Sheriff, Thorne replied, his voice gravelly. Until it is, tell me everything. Brody laid out the sparse details. The boys, inseparable brothers, had been last seen leaving choir practice at the Holy Trinity Baptist Church on Tuesday evening, just after dusk. They lived a mere 3 blocks from the church, a walk they knew by heart. Their parents, devout members of the congregation, had raised the alarm when the boys didn't return for supper. A frantic search had yielded nothing but muddy footprints near the church's back gate, footprints that simply ended. No ransom notes, no witnesses. Thorne pressed, leaning against a peeling wall, his gaze sweeping the sparse evidence board, a crude map of the town, a blurry photograph of the 2 smiling boys. Brody shook his head, his face a mask of frustration. Nothing. Not a soul saw a thing. And Reverend Caldwell, he's beside himself. These boys were the heart of his choir. The Reverend Tobias Caldwell, Thorne had heard of him even before coming to Havenwood. A charismatic fire and brimstone preacher whose sermons were said to draw crowds from miles around, a man who commanded fierce loyalty and an almost fanatical devotion from his flock. Thorne had an immediate, almost instinctive distrust of men who wielded such absolute influence. Let's start with the church, Thorne suggested, and the Reverend. The Holy Trinity Baptist Church stood as the town's spiritual and architectural centerpiece, a grand stone edifice that seemed to frown down on the smaller, humbler buildings around it. Inside, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, indefinable mustiness. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished pews. It should have felt peaceful, but Thorne felt a pervasive, unsettling silence, a quiet that seemed to swallow sound rather than embrace it. Reverend Caldwell was waiting, a tall, imposing figure with an ascetic face and eyes that burned with a contained intensity. He was dressed immaculately, his clerical collar stark against his dark suit. He extended a hand, his grip firm, almost bone-crushing. Detective Thorne, this is a tragedy beyond words. Thomas and Samuel were blessings, gifts from God. Their disappearance, it's a test of our faith. Thorne observed the man, noting the slight tremor in his hand, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw. Was it grief? Or something else? Reverend, when did you last see the boys? After choir practice Tuesday, around 6:30. They were among the last to leave. Such bright, obedient boys. Caldwell's voice, though solemn, carried the practiced cadence of a seasoned orator. They usually walked home together. They knew the way like the back of their hands. Did anything seem out of the ordinary? Caldwell paused, his gaze drifting towards the empty choir stools. No, just a regular evening. The usual hymns, a final prayer. Nothing. If only I had kept them a moment longer. A shadow crossed his face, a flicker of something Thorne couldn't quite place. Regret, or perhaps something colder. Thorne walked the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. He imagined the two boys, their youthful voices lifted in song, now swallowed by the silence of the town. He peered into the Sunday school rooms, the small office, even the dusty bell tower. Every corner seemed to hold its breath, unwilling to give up its secrets. He noticed a small, intricately carved wooden bird perched on a windowsill in the choir room, clearly out of place. It was old, weathered, and looked like a child's forgotten toy, yet there was something oddly deliberate about its placement. He picked it up, feeling the smooth, worn wood beneath his thumb. A small detail, perhaps, but in a town where nothing was supposed to be out of place, it felt like a tiny, misplaced puzzle piece. As the sun began to dip, casting long, unsettling shadows through the stained glass, Thorne knew this case was far from straightforward. Havenwood held its secrets close, its devout facade hiding something dark and intricate. The missing boys were merely the first tremor of an earthquake yet to strike. The real mystery, he suspected, lay not in where they had gone, but in what, or rather, who, had driven them there. And he had a chilling feeling that the pious silence of Havenwood was about to break, revealing a cacophony of hidden fears and buried sins. If you're captivated by the unfolding mystery of Havenwood and eager to see how Detective Thorne uncovers the truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any part of this chilling tale. This is a fictional story. The wooden bird from the choir room felt surprisingly heavy in Thorne's palm, almost as if it carried a silent burden. He turned it over, examining the crude yet earnest carvings. No initials, no distinguishing marks. Just a child's attempt at art. He tucked it into his coat pocket, a small, tangible anchor in a sea of intangibles. His interview with Reverend Caldwell had been cordial, almost too cordial. The Reverend's grief seemed genuine, yet there was an undercurrent of guardedness, a subtle deflection in his answers, especially when Thorne pressed about any recent tensions within the congregation or specific individuals who might have had an issue with the Miller family. Caldwell had simply shaken his head, reiterating the church's unity. Thorne didn't buy it. Unity was often the most impenetrable shield for discord. Sheriff Brody, a man of simple honesty, had provided what little information he had, but Thorne sensed he was out of his depth. The town, as Brody admitted, was tight-knit, resistant to outsiders, and particularly averse to any stain on its pristine image. "Folks here, they keep to themselves, Detective," Brody had explained, a hint of resignation in his voice. "Especially with church matters. The Reverend, he's practically the town's mayor, judge, and confessor all rolled into one." Thorne decided to visit the Miller family next. Their small, meticulously kept house was shadowed by a giant oak, its leaves rustling like whispered secrets. Martha Miller, the boy's mother, was a woman worn thin by worry, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, as if all tears had been shed. Her husband, Thomas Sr., sat beside her, a stoic figure, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. They spoke in hushed tones, almost reverently about their sons. "They were good boys," Martha choked out, her voice raspy. "Never caused a speck of trouble. Loved the church. Loved the choir." "Did they have any enemies?" Thorne asked gently. "Anyone who might have wished them harm?" Thomas Sr. shook his head. No, sir, everyone loved them. They were a credit to Havenwood. Were there any recent disagreements with anyone from the church or outside? Thorne pressed, watching their faces closely. He saw a flicker of hesitation in Martha's eyes, quickly suppressed. No, Detective, Thomas Sr. said, his voice firm, almost too firm. Nothing, just the devil's work. Thorne sensed a wall, carefully constructed. He decided not to push too hard, not yet. He learned that the boys' choirmaster was a man named Mr. Silas Blackwood, a stern, reclusive individual known for his demanding nature, but also his musical brilliance. Blackwood lived alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, rarely seen outside of church services. He seemed like a logical next step. The sky, once a brilliant blue, had begun to turn an ominous bruised purple as Thorne made his way to Blackwood's cottage. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The cottage was dark, its windows like vacant eyes. Thorne knocked. No answer. He tried again, louder. Still nothing. The front door was unlocked, a small detail that raised a red flag. Most folks in Havenwood, even in a town supposedly free of crime, locked their doors. He pushed the door open, a faint creak disturbing the silence. The air inside was cold, stale and heavy, with the scent of old books and something metallic, almost like iron. The house was orderly, almost unnervingly so. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes on music theory and theology. A piano stood in the corner, its keys covered with a dust cloth. Everything was meticulously arranged, as if waiting for an absent owner. Thorne's gaze swept the room, searching for anything out of place. On a small, cluttered desk, among sheets of music and neatly stacked papers, he found a half-finished letter. The handwriting was precise, elegant. It was addressed to Reverend Caldwell. The few lines visible spoke of a matter of grave importance and a moral failing that cannot be ignored. The rest was obscured by a blot of spilled ink. This was intriguing. Blackwood, the reclusive choirmaster, writing a letter of grave importance to the Reverend, hinting at a moral failing. Had the boys been privy to something? Had Blackwood? The metallic scent in the air grew stronger as Thorne moved deeper into the house, into a small dark study. The scent here was undeniable. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to trigger Thorne's instincts. On the floor, near a heavy wooden chair, was a faint dark stain. It looked old, almost dried, but it was there. And beside it, partially hidden under a rug, was a small, tarnished silver locket. He picked it up carefully. It was old, intricately engraved with the initials S.B. Silas Blackwood, or something else. He opened it. Inside, faded with time, were two tiny, sepia-toned photographs. A young boy and a young girl, both with hauntingly similar eyes. A new wave of questions crashed over Thorne. Was Blackwood involved in the boy's disappearance? Had something happened here related to the moral failing he mentioned in the letter? The silence of the cottage suddenly felt menacing, not empty. It was filled with unspoken stories, with the echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. He turned, but there was nothing. Just the deepening twilight outside the window, painting the world in shades of gloom. The wind howled softly, a mournful lament through the skeletal branches of the trees. Havenwood, he realized, was not just holding its secrets. It was guarding them with a ferocity he was only beginning to comprehend. The missing choir boys were no simple runaways. They were threads in a much larger, darker tapestry. The faint bloodstain on Silas Blackwood's study floor, coupled with the cryptic letter in the tarnished locket, had shifted the axis of Thorne's investigation. He left the locket undisturbed, a silent witness to a potential crime, and hurried back to Sheriff Brody. The sheriff, upon hearing Thorne's findings, paled. Blackwood? Silas? He's a good man. Reclusive, yes, but devoted to the church. He'd never harm those boys. The immediate denial, tinged with shock, was a common first reaction in small towns. Good men can do bad things, Sheriff, especially when secrets are involved, Thorne stated, his voice flat. We need to find Mr. Blackwood immediately, and we need to check the church records. Any past incidents? Any dismissals? Any complaints, no matter how small, concerning the choir or the boys? Brody, though visibly shaken, moved with a newfound urgency. While he dispatched deputies to search for Blackwood, Thorne returned to the church, the wooden bird still heavy in his pocket, now feeling less like a child's toy and more like a silent accusation. He sought out the church secretary, a timid woman named Agnes Peterson, whose desk was buried under stacks of meticulously organized papers. She seemed almost afraid to meet his gaze. Mrs. Peterson, Thorne began, his tone gentle. I need access to the church's old records, specifically anything related to Mr. Blackwood or any past incidents involving choir members or children. Agnes wrung her hands. But, Detective, Reverend Caldwell keeps those records. He's very particular about them. Says they are the sacred history of our congregation. I understand, but this is a police investigation. 2 boys are missing. If there's anything in those records that could help, we need to see it. Thorne's voice hardened slightly, conveying the gravity of the situation. He saw her resolve waver. After a tense moment, Agnes reluctantly led him to a small, dusty archive room in the church basement. The air was thick with the scent of age and neglect. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling like morbid lace. She pointed to a locked, heavy oak cabinet. The Reverend keeps the oldest records in here. He has the only key. Thorne's jaw tightened. Of course he does. This only fueled his suspicions about Caldwell. Why such secrecy? He asked Agnes to fetch the Reverend, reiterating the urgency. While he waited, he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible scratch mark near the cabinet's lock, as if someone had tried to force it open. This wasn't just a record-keeper's meticulousness, it was a fortress. Reverend Caldwell arrived shortly, his expression unreadable, a blend of concern and something Thorne recognized as controlled annoyance. Mrs. Peterson informed me you wish to inspect the church's private archives, Detective. I assure you there is nothing in these records that pertains to this tragedy. Our history is one of unwavering faith. With all due respect, Reverend, that's for me to determine, Thorne countered, his gaze steady. 2 boys are gone, and Mr. Blackwood seems to have vanished as well after leaving a note hinting at a moral failing concerning this church. Caldwell's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a tightening around his eyes. Silas, gone? But that's preposterous. He is a man of God, and any moral failing would surely be a matter of personal confession, not a police concern. He handed over a heavy, ornate brass key, his movements stiff. You may look, Detective, but you will find nothing but piety. Thorne unlocked the cabinet. Inside, neatly stacked, were ledgers, baptismal records, marriage certificates, and old correspondence, all meticulously bound. He began to sift through the choir rosters from previous years, cross-referencing them with any notes of disciplinary actions or unusual occurrences. The hours crawled by, punctuated only by the rustling of old paper and the distant tolling of the town clock. Then he found it. Tucked away in a ledger from 15 years prior was a brief, almost dismissive entry. Disciplinary action taken against Silas Blackwood regarding an incident with a junior choir member. Matter resolved privately by the Reverend. Confirmed Blackwood's remorse and dedication to future piety. No names, no specifics, just this terse, vague note. It spoke volumes. The silver locket, the bloodstain, the letter, Blackwood's disappearance. It all began to coalesce into a chilling pattern. Just as Thorne was about to call Brody, a faint, almost imperceptible sound came from the other side of the archive room, from behind a stack of forgotten hymnals. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Thorne froze, his hand instinctively going to his hip, where his revolver rested. He moved slowly, deliberately, towards the sound, his breath held. As he rounded a tall stack of dusty boxes, he saw it. A small, dark shape, hunched in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. It was a person, their back to him, digging furiously at the wall with a small, rusted trowel. "Hands where I can see them," Thorne commanded, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. The figure froze, then slowly turned. It was a young woman, perhaps in her late teens, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with fear and recognition. It was Eleanor Vance, the older sister of one of the missing boy's friends, a shy girl who attended the church regularly. She clutched the trowel like a weapon, her whole body trembling. Behind her, exposed by the frantic digging, was a loose brick in the wall, revealing a dark, shallow cavity. "What are you doing here, Miss Vance?" Thorne asked, his voice softer, but no less firm. The scratching sound had not been a rat. It had been something desperate, a frantic search. The metallic tang of fear hung heavy in the air, a scent Thorne knew all too well. Havenwood was giving up its secrets, one terrified whisper at a time. The real drama, he knew, was just beginning, and the implications were far more disturbing than a simple kidnapping. Eleanor Vance dropped the rusted trowel with a clatter, her shoulders slumping. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her eyes darting between Thorne and the exposed cavity in the wall. I had to," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I heard them, whispering about a place, a hidden place." "Heard who, Eleanor?" Thorne pressed gently, stepping closer, his presence a calm anchor in her storm of fear. He noticed how young she truly was, how fragile she seemed in the musty gloom of the archive. "The boys," she confessed, tears finally streaming down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Thomas and Samuel, they were talking about a secret in the church, something they weren't supposed to know. They said they found a hole where secrets were kept, and they were going to put something back, something they took." "What did they take, Eleanor?" Thorne asked, his mind racing. A hidden cavity, secrets, the boys planning to put something back. She shook her head, unable to speak, pointing a trembling finger at the small, dark void behind the loose brick. "They said it was where the bad things were buried." Thorne knelt, peering into the narrow space. It was just large enough for a small box or a few rolled-up papers. He reached in, his fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. He pulled it out. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from a high, grimy window, illuminating the faded gold embossing on the cover. "Holy Trinity Baptist Church, Private Confessions." A chill, far colder than the damp basement air, snaked down Thorne's spine. Private confessions. Not records, but confessions. And the boys knew about it. Had they taken this journal? Was this what they were trying to put back? The implications were staggering. If these were actual confessions, what kind of secrets did they hold? What bad things were buried here, literally and figuratively? He opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was neat, precise, surprisingly familiar. It was Reverend Caldwell's. The entries were dated, spanning years, decades even. They weren't just confessions from the congregation, they were Caldwell's own notes on these confessions, his interpretations, his judgments. And some, Thorne saw with a growing sense of dread, were not just spiritual guidance. They were detailed accounts of perceived transgressions, family disputes, illicit relationships, financial improprieties. Caldwell had been collecting ammunition, leveraging the sanctity of the confessional for something far more sinister than spiritual healing. As Thorne flipped through the pages, a name leaped out at him, underlined repeatedly in several entries, spanning a period 15 years prior. Silas Blackwood. The entries detailed Blackwood's struggle with unspeakable desires, his dark temptations, and the private resolution reached with the Reverend to safeguard the innocence of the congregation. This was the incident with a junior choir member from the Ledger, but here the details were horrifyingly explicit. Blackwood had confessed to inappropriate behavior with a young boy from the choir, a boy named David Vance, Eleanor's older brother, who had died tragically young from a mysterious illness years ago. The confession painted Blackwood as a tormented soul, struggling against his urges, and Caldwell as his spiritual guide, his confidant, and seemingly his protector. Thorne felt a surge of cold fury. Caldwell hadn't just resolved the matter privately. He had covered it up, used it to control Blackwood. And young David Vance had paid the price. Had the Miller boys stumbled upon this same journal? Had they discovered the truth about Blackwood, about David Vance, and about Reverend Caldwell's complicity? Eleanor, still trembling, managed to explain. Thomas. He was always so curious. He found an old key hidden in the bell tower. He said it fit a special lock. They snuck in one night just to look. They were just playing, but they saw something that scared them. They said they heard old Mr. Blackwood crying, talking to himself, saying, "I'm sorry, David, I'm so sorry." And then they found the journal. They told me they were going to put it back after showing it to someone who would believe them. Her voice trailed off, a fresh wave of tears overtaking her. Who were they going to show it to, Eleanor? Thorne asked, his voice strained. She shook her head. I don't know. They just said, the right person. They were so scared, Detective. So scared. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place with a horrifying precision. The moral failing in Blackwood's letter, the bloodstain in his cottage, the locket with the two children's photos, one of whom must have been David Vance. Blackwood, tormented by his past, perhaps about to expose the truth to save the new generation of choir boys, had been silenced. And the Miller boys, with their innocent curiosity, had stumbled upon a truth that Reverend Caldwell had spent years burying. This wasn't just about missing boys. It was about a town built on lies, a church steeped in secrets, and a shepherd who preyed on his flock. Just then, Sheriff Brody burst into the archive room, his face grim. Detective, we found Silas Blackwood, or what's left of him, in the old abandoned mill just outside of town. Looks like he fell, or was pushed, and he was holding this. Brody extended a hand, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden bird, identical to the one Thorne had found in the choir room, except this one was broken. One wing snapped. Thorne stared at the broken bird, then at the intact one in his own pocket, a gift from the Miller boys, perhaps, or a clue they'd left behind. The symmetry was chilling. Blackwood hadn't just disappeared. He had been silenced, just as he was about to reveal the truth. And the boys, now holding the damning evidence of Caldwell's corrupt control, were the only remaining witnesses. They hadn't just vanished. They had been taken, to ensure the secrets of Havenwood remained buried. The race was on, not just to find the boys, but to expose the rot at the very heart of this supposedly pious town before it claimed more innocent lives. If you're on the edge of your seat and desperate to know what happens next in this dark mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us bring more gripping stories like the macabre mystery of the missing choir boys to life. This is a fictional story. The discovery of Silas Blackwood's body, his broken wooden bird, a grim counterpoint to the boy's own, solidified Thorne's chilling hypothesis. Blackwood hadn't just stumbled, he had been silenced. And the confessions journal, now clutched in Thorne's hand, was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a record of sins. It was Reverend Caldwell's carefully curated ledger of leverage, a tool of control over his congregation, a shield against external scrutiny, and a weapon against anyone who dared to challenge his authority. Thorne immediately ordered Sheriff Brody to secure the journal and to place Reverend Caldwell under discreet surveillance. "Do not let him out of your sight, Sheriff," Thorne instructed, his voice low and urgent. "But do not let him know he is being watched. He is far more dangerous than we previously imagined." Brody, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, nodded. The pious facade of Havenwood was crumbling, revealing a sinister landscape beneath. Thorne's next move was to visit Eleanor Vance again, this time with a more focused purpose. Her fear, while palpable, was also a wellspring of potential information. He found her at home. Her parents worried but clueless about her actions in the church basement. He explained carefully what he had found in the journal, particularly the entry about her brother David Vance and Silas Blackwood. Eleanor listened, her eyes wide, tears welling up again as the pieces of her own family's tragedy clicked into place. David. He was always so quiet, she whispered, her voice choked with grief. He loved singing in the choir, but after that incident he changed, he became withdrawn. And then he got sick so fast. The Reverend told us it was God's will, a weakness of the spirit. We believed him. The raw pain of a long-buried grief, now mingled with bitter betrayal, washed over her. So, Thomas and Samuel, they found out about David? And that's why. It's a strong possibility, Eleanor, Thorne confirmed, his heart aching for her. They found the journal, they connected the dots, and they intended to expose the truth, just as Mr. Blackwood might have been planning to do. But who would take them? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. And where would they go? Thorne knew the who was almost certainly Reverend Caldwell, or someone acting on his behalf. The where was the terrifying unknown. Caldwell was too cunning, too powerful, to leave such a crucial loose end unaddressed. He would have a place, a secure location, perhaps even a network of loyal, unquestioning parishioners willing to follow his commands without question. He spent the rest of the afternoon re-interviewing every member of the choir, every church elder, every person who had been near the church on the night the boys disappeared. He looked for subtle cues, nervous glances, inconsistencies in their stories. The air was thick with unease. People were polite, but their eyes held a new wariness. The whispers of the town had shifted, from worry about the boys to a simmering fear about what the detective might uncover next. The very bedrock of their community, faith and trust in their leader, was being challenged. One old woman, Mrs. Gable, a stern-faced, devout pillar of the community, spoke in hushed tones about the Reverend's quiet discipline. "He has his ways, detective," she said, her voice barely audible. "Ways of ensuring loyalty. People here, they don't question him. His word is God's word." She refused to elaborate, her gaze drifting nervously towards the church steeple visible from her window. Thorne noticed a pattern. Several members of the congregation, when asked about their activities on the night of the disappearance, gave surprisingly vague or identical alibis, almost as if they had been rehearsed. Small, seemingly insignificant details, but they nagged at him. He also paid close attention to anyone who seemed overly zealous in their defense of Caldwell, or who subtly tried to steer the conversation away from the church's inner workings. That evening, as a thick fog rolled in from the river, blanketing Havenwood in an eerie shroud, Thorne decided to revisit the Miller house. He had a hunch about the right person the boys were going to show the journal to. It had to be someone they trusted implicitly, someone close. He found Martha Miller sitting alone on her porch swing, gazing blankly into the mist, a silent sentinel of grief. "Mrs. Miller," Thorne said, his voice soft, I need to ask you something very important. Did Thomas or Samuel ever mention a secret they found? Something they were going to tell you about or show you?" Martha flinched, a tremor passing through her body. Her eyes, which had been dull with sorrow, suddenly sharpened, reflecting a raw, desperate fear. "No, never. My boys. They wouldn't keep secrets from me." Her denial was too vehement, too immediate. "Mrs. Miller, I believe your sons found something in the church, something dangerous, something that put them in peril. And I believe they were going to bring it to you," Thorne pressed, watching her carefully. "They were going to expose a truth that has been buried for years, a truth that touched your family before." Martha's resolve crumbled. She began to weep, deep, ragged sobs that tore at Thorne's heart. "They did," she confessed, her voice choked. "Thomas, he left a note under my pillow. He said they had found something terrible, something that explained why David Vance had died. He said they were going to show me after choir practice that night. He said it was the only way to make things right for David." "Did they say anything else?" Thorne asked, a desperate hope blooming in his chest. Where they were going with it. What they found? Martha shook her head through her tears. "No, just that they had to put it back after I saw it, and that Reverend Caldwell would be very, very angry. I thought it was just a child's overactive imagination. I never thought—" Her voice broke, swallowed by fresh sobs. Thorne knew now. The boys hadn't taken the journal away from the church for long. They had intended to show it to their mother, a brief, dangerous detour before returning it to its hiding place. But someone had intervened. Someone had been watching them. And that someone was almost certainly connected to the one man who had everything to lose, Reverend Caldwell. The fog grew thicker, wrapping around the houses, obscuring the church steeple, creating a suffocating sense of isolation. Thorne felt the net tightening around him, a chilling awareness that he was now squarely in Caldwell's sights. The missing choir boys' case was no longer a search. It was a desperate race against time, a desperate attempt to rescue them from a man who considered himself above earthly law, a man whose secrets were literally buried in the walls of his own church. And Thorne had a terrible premonition that the quiet, pious town of Havenwood was about to explode. The air was heavy, not just with fog, but with the palpable presence of fear and unspoken threats. The confession from Martha Miller, coupled with Eleanor's testimony and the damning evidence of the journal, solidified Thorne's convictions. Reverend Caldwell was the architect of this macabre mystery. His pious facade was a meticulously crafted prison, not only for his congregation, but for the truth itself. Thorne knew he couldn't confront Caldwell directly without risking the boys' lives. The Reverend was too cunning, too deeply entrenched in the town's psyche. He needed to find the boys first, and for that, he needed more than suspicions. He needed a break in Caldwell's ironclad control. Sheriff Brody, though still reeling from the revelations, proved to be a valuable, if reluctant, ally. He was a man of integrity, however naive, and the thought of Caldwell's corruption enraged him. "What do we do, Detective?" Brody asked, his voice strained. "He's got this town wrapped around his finger." "We shake the foundations, Sheriff," Thorne replied, his eyes steely. "We look for the cracks. Caldwell can't be everywhere, and he can't control everyone. There has to be someone, a loyalist perhaps, who is now wavering, or someone he's leaned on too heavily, someone who might crack under pressure." Thorne decided to focus on the inner circle of the church, the deacons, the long-standing elders, the most devout members. He revisited them, but this time his questions were sharper, his gaze more piercing. He spoke of the journal, of Silas Blackwood's fate, of David Vance's tragic end, carefully observing their reactions. Most offered platitudes or feigned ignorance, but a few showed subtle signs of unease, a flicker of fear in their eyes, a nervous fidgeting, a sudden loss of composure. One name kept resurfacing, whispered in hushed tones by several congregants, always in connection with Caldwell. Deacon Elijah Thorne, no relation to the detective, a man known for his unwavering loyalty to the Reverend and his zealotry. Elijah was also a prominent landowner in Havenwood with several secluded properties. He seemed like a likely candidate to be Caldwell's enforcer, or at the very least, a willing accomplice. Thorne and Brody drove out to Deacon Thorne's secluded farm, located several miles outside of town, nestled deep in a thick stand of woods. The property was large, with several outbuildings, including an old, imposing stone barn that stood apart from the others, its windows boarded up. The air was still and oppressive, even as twilight began to fall. As they approached the main farmhouse, a figure emerged from the barn, carrying a bucket. It was Deacon Thorne, a gaunt man with piercing, almost fanatical eyes, his face etched with a severe piety. He paused, seeing the sheriff's car, and his eyes narrowed when he spotted Thorne. His grip on the bucket visibly tightened. "Deacon Thorne," Brody greeted, trying to maintain a civil tone. "We need to ask you a few questions." "Questions?" the deacon said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. "I've told you everything I know about the missing boys. This is a matter for God's judgment, not earthly authorities." His gaze flicked to the boarded-up barn, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but Thorne caught it. "It concerns more than just the boys, Deacon," Thorne interjected, his voice firm. "It concerns Silas Blackwood, and the contents of Reverend Caldwell's private journal." At the mention of the journal, the deacon's already pale face went ashen. His eyes widened, a flicker of raw fear replacing his rigid piety. He clutched the bucket tighter, his knuckles white. "We know about David Vance, Deacon," Thorne continued, pushing, "and we know about the secrets Caldwell has buried. We believe the Miller boys stumbled upon those secrets, just as Mr. Blackwood was trying to expose them." The deacon's breathing became shallow, ragged. He cast a terrified glance towards the barn, then back at Thorne. You don't understand," he stammered, his voice trembling. "The Reverend, he ensures our salvation. He protects us from sin." "By silencing anyone who speaks the truth," Thorne countered, his voice low and dangerous. "By destroying innocent lives. Where are the boys, Deacon?" Deacon Thorne's eyes darted frantically, first to the barn, then to the dense woods surrounding his property, as if seeking an escape route. His internal struggle was palpable, a man caught between his twisted loyalty and a newfound, overwhelming fear. Just as Thorne thought he might break, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the silence, a frantic barking of dogs from deeper within the woods, followed by a distant, desperate shout. The deacon's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new horror. "No, not here! They're not supposed to be here!" He dropped the bucket, splashing water across the dry ground, and bolted towards the woods, his gaunt frame surprisingly fast. "Sheriff, that way!" Thorne yelled, adrenaline coursing through him. The deacon's panic was a clear indicator. He knew something. He was hiding something, and it was in those woods, or in that barn. They pursued the deacon, crashing through the undergrowth, the distant barking growing louder, more frantic. The woods became denser, the light fading rapidly. Thorne heard a rustling ahead, then a desperate yelp followed by a heavy thud. They burst into a small, overgrown clearing. Deacon Thorne lay sprawled on the ground, his face contorted in pain. Standing over him, a crude, heavy log lying nearby, was a large, burly man, his face grim, his eyes narrowed with a cold, calculating fury. Beside him, two lean, snarling dogs were straining at their leashes. The man was one of the church elders, Thomas Abernathy, a quiet, unassuming man Thorne had interviewed earlier. Abernathy, usually deferential, now stood with a menacing authority, his eyes fixed on the fallen deacon, then slowly, chillingly, on Thorne. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." Abernathy said, his voice low and menacing, entirely devoid of his usual meekness. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, for the good of all. He moved to block Thorne's path, his dogs growling, baring their teeth. The air crackled with a new, immediate danger. The confrontation was not with the deacon, but with someone far more formidable, someone clearly acting as Caldwell's enforcer. The location of the boys, Thorne realized with a jolt of horrifying certainty, was very close. The woods were closing in, and with them, the true depths of Havenwood's darkness. The sudden appearance of Thomas Abernathy, a man Thorne had dismissed as a mild-mannered church elder, shattered the last vestiges of Havenwood's illusion. Abernathy's eyes, devoid of their usual benignity, now held a cold, unwavering resolve, and his dogs, snarling at the end of their leashes, confirmed his role as Caldwell's muscle. Deacon Thorne, sprawled on the ground, whimpered, He knows about the children." Abernathy ignored the deacon, his gaze fixed on Thorne. "You've dug deep, detective," he said, his voice a low growl. "Deeper than you should have. Havenwood's faith is sacred. The Reverend protects us. By kidnapping children and silencing witnesses?" Thorne shot back, his hand hovering over his revolver. "Where are the boys, Abernathy? Where are Thomas and Samuel Miller?" Abernathy's lips curled into a sneer. "They are being cared for. Repentance must be learned, detective, even by the young." He gestured with a subtle flick of his head towards the old, boarded-up stone barn back at the deacon's property. They were noisy. Had to move them. But they'll be disciplined, just like all who stray. Thorne's blood ran cold. "Moved them?" He glanced at Brody, who had also drawn his weapon, his face grim. "Where did you move them?" Abernathy chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Somewhere no one will find them. Somewhere safe from the devil's whispers and from busybodies like you." He tightened his grip on the dog's leashes, preparing to lunge. "You don't understand the Reverend's work. He purifies. He preserves. He takes those who are susceptible and guides them." "He controls them!" Thorne roared, fury lacing his voice. "He exploits their faith, their innocence. He murdered Silas Blackwood to keep his secrets buried, just like he silenced David Vance." At the mention of David Vance, Abernathy's composure flickered, a momentary shadow of pain in his eyes. He quickly regained control, his face hardening. David was a special case. The Reverend saved his soul. And he will save these boys' souls too. You cannot stop God's will, detective. The argument was futile. Abernathy was too deeply indoctrinated, too fanatical in his loyalty to Caldwell. Thorne knew a direct confrontation here, in the deepening twilight, surrounded by Abernathy's dogs and with the injured deacon, was a losing battle. He had to think strategically. "Sheriff," Thorne said, his voice calm but authoritative, "take the deacon, get him to safety, get him medical attention. I'll handle Abernathy." Brody hesitated, then nodded, understanding the unspoken command. While Brody moved to secure the groaning deacon, Thorne created a diversion. He threw a heavy branch into the dense undergrowth to their left. Abernathy's dogs, startled, strained in that direction, giving Thorne a precious few seconds. He used the opportunity to circle around, trying to gain a tactical advantage, moving through the trees as Abernathy struggled to control his agitated animals. The air grew heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, punctuated by the growls of the dogs and the occasional shouts of Abernathy. Thorne used his knowledge of the terrain, moving silently, trying to flank Abernathy. He knew his only chance was to disarm the man and subdue him before he could harm either of them or escape. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the woods, clear and resonant, amplified by the evening air. "Thomas, what is the meaning of this commotion? Have you forgotten your purpose?" It was Reverend Caldwell. He emerged from the trees, his dark suit a stark silhouette against the fading light, his expression one of controlled displeasure. He was not alone. Behind him, two other men, burly and stern-faced, appeared, armed with shotguns. Caldwell hadn't just relied on Abernathy. He had a network of devoted enforcers, a private militia. The game had just changed. Abernathy, upon hearing Caldwell's voice, immediately ceased his struggle with the dogs, his posture shifting into one of deferential obedience. "Reverend, the detective, he knows too much. He's trying to disrupt God's work." Caldwell's gaze swept over the scene. The injured deacon, the armed sheriff, and Thorne, partially concealed in the trees. His eyes, usually burning with a contained intensity, now held a cold, calculating fury. "Indeed, it seems our guest has overstayed his welcome. Some truths, detective, are not meant for the ears of unbelievers." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, yet still carrying through the stillness. "The children are safe. They are with us, and they will remain with us until they are truly purified. You cannot take them." Thorne emerged fully from the trees, his revolver now openly in his hand. "Reverend, this charade ends now. I have your journal. I know about David Vance. I know about Silas Blackwood. And I know you've kidnapped those boys." Caldwell's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed to slits. "Lies. Blasphemy. You seek to sow discord in the Lord's flock. Thomas, ensure this man understands the error of his ways." Abernathy moved, his dogs lunging forward, their barks echoing ominously through the darkening woods. The two men with shotguns raised their weapons, aiming directly at Thorne and Brody. The air crackled with imminent violence. Thorne knew this was it. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and deep in Caldwell's territory. But he also knew the boys were close. Their lives depended on him. The climax of Havenwood's macabre mystery was not just approaching. It was here, in the heart of the dark, whispering woods, under the cold, unblinking gaze of a man who believed himself God. If your heart is pounding and you need to know how Detective Thorne will escape this perilous situation and save the missing choir boys, don't miss the next thrilling chapter. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you're the first to know how this intense mystery unfolds. This is a fictional story. The standoff in the darkening woods was absolute. Reverend Caldwell, flanked by his two armed enforcers and Thomas Abernathy with his snarling dogs, confronted Thorne and the outmatched Sheriff Brody. Despite the danger, Thorne's resolve was unwavering. The boys were near. He felt it. "Lower your weapons, Reverend," Thorne commanded, his voice steady. "This isn't salvation. This is abduction. This is murder. You're a tyrant hiding behind a pulpit." Caldwell's eyes blazed with a chilling, self-righteous fury. "You blaspheme, detective. I do God's work. These children needed to be brought back into the fold, cleansed." He gestured vaguely towards the deeper woods. "They are being guided, re-educated." "And Silas Blackwood, was he re-educated too, Reverend?" Thorne pressed, seizing on a flicker of pain he'd seen in Abernathy. "Was David Vance cleansed? You control these people with their sins, leveraging their weaknesses for your own twisted power?" Abernathy visibly flinched at the mention of David Vance, his grip on the dog's leashes loosening. "Thomas, control yourself," Caldwell snapped, sensing Abernathy's momentary lapse. "What about David, Abernathy?" Thorne yelled. "What really happened to him? Caldwell buried the truth, didn't he? Just like he's burying these boys." Abernathy's eyes showed torment, caught between Caldwell's gaze and Thorne's accusation. The diversion worked. As Abernathy hesitated, Sheriff Brody rushed an enforcer, tackling him. A shotgun discharged harmlessly. Chaos erupted. Caldwell bellowed orders. "Abernathy, Torn, chose fanaticism and lunged at Thorne, his dogs barking. The other enforcer raised his shotgun at Brody. Thorne dodged Abernathy's charge, then fired 2 quick shots, one shattering the lantern, plunging the barn into darkness, and the other disarming an enforcer. Panic set in among Caldwell's men. Thorne, using slivers of moonlight, moved swiftly towards the children's partition. He reached them. "Thomas, Samuel, are you all right?" "Yes, but they're coming," Thomas whispered back. Suddenly Abernathy grabbed Thorne from behind. They struggled in the darkness. "You won't take them," Abernathy hissed. "You're just another victim." Thorne grunted, striking Abernathy's jaw. The larger man stumbled back. Just then a beam of light cut through the darkness. Sheriff Brody, limping but resolute, stood in the doorway with deputies. Caldwell, illuminated, stood frozen, his power crumbling. His enforcers dropped their weapons. Thorne pulled the children from behind the partition. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe now." Caldwell, seeing his empire collapse, let out a guttural cry and swung his shotgun towards Thorne and the children. But before he could fire, Sheriff Brody raised his revolver, a single shot echoing with finality. Caldwell staggered and collapsed, silenced forever. The macabre mystery had reached its bloody, chilling conclusion. The barn was a scene of controlled chaos. The remaining enforcers were apprehended. Thomas Abernathy was taken into custody, burdened by remorse for David Vance. Reverend Caldwell lay still, a chilling testament to his dark reign. Thorne ensured the children, Thomas, Samuel, and the 2 others, were reunited with their relieved parents. Martha Miller held her sons tightly, her gratitude profound. Thomas clutched the wooden bird, a symbol of their ordeal and resilience. The Holy Trinity Baptist Church became a crime scene. The Confessions Journal, a damning record of Caldwell's abuse, was secured. News of his true nature spread, sparking anger, betrayal, and sorrow in Havenwood. The town's pious silence broke, replaced by accusations and the raw truth. Sheriff Brody, though injured, carried himself with renewed purpose, beginning a thorough investigation into Caldwell's activities. "Havenwood will heal," he told Thorne, weary but resolute. "Thanks to you." Thorne stayed a few more days, ensuring the children received care. He visited Eleanor Vance, who found peace knowing the truth about her brother was finally revealed. The town, once guarded, slowly opened up, its residents sharing unspoken anxieties, a collective sigh of relief after years of suppression. For Elias Thorne, this harrowing case brought a subtle shift. He had seen depravity, but also human resilience, the courage of children, and quiet heroism. He had brought light to darkness, and his own internal shadows felt a little less sharp. On the train platform, Thorne stood with Sheriff Brody. "My work here is done, Sheriff," Thorne said. "Havenwood is in good hands now." Brody nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal and mutual respect. As the train departed, Thorne looked back. The church steeple, once a symbol of faith, now stood as a stark reminder of unchecked power. But below it, Havenwood, bruised and scarred, was breathing. It was a new beginning, a community rebuilding on the painful, liberating foundation of truth. The mystery was solved, its threads unraveled, and Havenwood had a chance at true redemption. Thorne closed his eyes, a faint glimmer of hope warming him for the first time in a long while.